Welcome into the Most Accurate Podcast and what will be the final recording of the Most Accurate Podcast for 2022 and the NFL season. Alongside John Paulsen, I'm Anthony Stalter. You can, of course, follow John at 444_John. I'm at Anthony Stalter. And John, I hope that the listeners and, of course, you had a very good holiday weekend and Santa brought you everything that you had wanted this year.
Yeah, it was a good Christmas. My mom's in town from Wisconsin,
Nice.
so it's always nice to see her. She's 82, and it's good to spend time with your family when you can. I hope you and the family had a good time as well.
Yeah, thanks. We did. The little one. It's always fun to. I know Mac's a little bit older these days, but I'm sure he's still excited for Christmas. So to watch the little ones just freak out on Christmas morning is cool.
Yeah, I would say, you go through a phase where they are manic trying to open presents because they just want stuff. And Max is now at the point where, Christmas is fine. He likes to get in the gifts and stuff, but he's a little cooler about it and helps with the presents and isn't as crazy trying to open things and
it's
impatient, I think is the word.
Yeah. My daughter Madeline she's still in the mode of she's 6, she's the older one, but she's trying to like open, oh look, and my son who's 4 is like he opens it and he's excited to open another one, but he also wants to play with the thing that he just opened, so he's always got this, it's like this pure conflict watching him constant because you can tell he wants to keep going, but he also want like open this up. I'm going to play with this in 2 seconds. So
it's stressful. It's stressful for kids. Yeah,
it is. It's a stressful time. Yeah. All right, let's dive into it. This week's biggest fantasy storylines. We've got some sneaky starts. We got the sleeper sneaky start of the week, our breakout receiver model. So you typically know that the template that we use here for the Most Accurate Podcast. But let's start off with some Thursday night takeaways, John. When last time was a mess. Last time was a mess with Tennessee. You discovered that Josh Dobbs was going to be starting the game instead of Malik Willis. I thought they were trying to preserve Malik Willis for next week because next week is when it all comes. The playoffs are decided for the Titans. So last night didn't matter. Even if they lost, it didn't matter whether or not they're going to make the playoffs. But as I was reading Paul Kuharsky and some of the Titans beat writers, the thought was, no, they're trying to see what they have in Josh Dobbs, because maybe he gives them a better chance to win next week against Jacksonville as opposed to the rookie Malik Willis. I was kind of surprised by this thought, but regardless, what were your takeaways last night from a fantasy perspective as the Cowboys knock off the Titans?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation where you have a game that's just basically not important to Tennessee because of the tilt next week that really decides everything for them. It's pretty much the same scenario for Jacksonville, although they do have a chance at the playoffs if they lose week 18 and win week 17 this week. So it appears that they're going to play their starters. With this Dobbs news, I thought it was just basically my initial reaction to it was you have a rookie who hasn't thrown for more than 100 yards. He hasn't even gotten to 100 yards. He's thrown 3 picks, no touchdowns, yards per attempt of 4.5. and completing 51% of his passes. And I think that they're maybe thinking that Dobbs at least gives them a fighting chance as a passer. He does have a little bit of, when I was running his college numbers and stuff, he does have the ability to run the ball as well. So it's almost as if he's, Malik Willis with maybe a better chance at passing the ball. And he did. He threw for 230 yards, a touchdown, a pick. He only averaged 5.9 yards per attempt. But I mean, we know this Dallas defense is pretty good. And it was just one of those things where you look at the receiving box score for Tennessee and it looks like a normal game now. I mean, it looks like, you get 66 yards from Treylon Burks, you got 40 yards or so and a touchdown from Robert Woods. Some other guys are getting involved and doing something. I mean, it was, I guess, from a standpoint of projecting, it was at least nice to be able to project some passing yards for this team. So I'll be interested to see what they do next week, if they go back to Dobbs again, or if they're going to, trot out Willis. Hassan Haskins was the lead back as expected. And I, was playing around with his rankings yesterday, and, I just didn't feel comfortable projecting him too high due to the unlikely nature that the Tennessee Titans were going to score a lot of real world points. And, so I had him, in the teens in terms of his touches, but pretty inefficient. And that's basically what we got, 3.3 yards per attempt. He got 2 catches. So just not a great day for him or anything. 53 total yards. And then the other kind of factor, interesting thing looking at was Pollard out was how much Malik Davis was going to play, and he did play quite a bit. But Ezekiel Elliott had 19 touches, did not catch a pass, which was a little bit surprising. He got the touchdown, which kind of saved it. But you would think with 19 touches, he would have had about 80 yards in that touchdown instead of under 40. Malik Davis got the 12 touches as the rotational back, and he did okay, but it wasn't the breakout game or anything that they were. Some of the people on Twitter were hoping for in terms of Malik Davis. And then I think, Dak Prescott had to throw the ball more than maybe the Cowboys thought that they were going to. He ended up 282 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then I'm rambling a little bit, but T.Y. Hilton, 5 targets was interesting. He only ran, I believe, 16 routes. 16 routes. Michael Gallup with 46 routes. But 5 targets on 16 routes. So they're really looking for Hilton when he's out there. And he's from a DFS standpoint, week 18 playoffs, he's an interesting play because he might be cheap, and they are really trying to target him when he gets onto the field compared to some of these other plays. And one last note, I did have a follower who I'm friendly with, and he helps me with, he's a ticket broker. I'm not going to say too much about him, but he was debating between Dalton Schultz and Tyler Higbee, and I watched his whole decision process through DMs. And I'm just like, well, I lean Schultz because I think he's a better player, but you can't. I wouldn't if you really want to start Higbee, I wouldn't talk you out of it because the way the Rams receiving core is right now, Dalton Schultz has been a little bit quiet, but Dalton's been good over the years with Dak. So that's the way I lean. And he talked himself back into Dalton Schultz. So he got the 2 touchdowns, and I thank you through the DMs, even though I didn't do a whole lot. I just ranked them higher.
Oh, good. That's awesome. I thought for sure you were gonna say he went with Tyler Higbee. I had a similar discussion with somebody that I was working with. I can't remember who his secondary choice was, but he was debating too because Schultz hadn't done much, and I just happened to look at Tennessee against tight ends, and they have struggled. Yeah. And I just said to him, I go, well, just food for thought. Tennessee struggle against tight ends. And then I looked at your rankings and I said, my guy John has him ranked higher than whoever was the other tight end. So hopefully, I haven't talked to him, but hopefully he also went with Dalton Schultz, courtesy of John Paulsen at 4for4.com.
Yeah, I mean, Tennessee is at 26 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. In this case, it was Higbee, 14th. The Chargers are 14th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So it wasn't a clear decision, but I'm glad he went with the way he did.
Me too. All right, let's get into this week's biggest storylines. And we start off with you just mentioned the Chargers. Austin Ekeler, back-to-back limited practices. We don't know if the Chargers are going to rest guys. We don't know if Jacksonville is going to rest guys. This is just welcome to week 17 in the NFL, where teams either have clinched and they're deciding whether or not to rest for the next couple of weeks. Is it a partial rest situation? Last night, fortunately, it was clear with Derrick Henry he wasn't going to play, so you had time to make a move. But for Austin Ekeler managers, John, what's your advice here?
Well, they do have a chance, and I was looking at playoff odds and stuff, and they do have a chance to move up in the seeding, and I think that is fairly important in the AFC specifically because that 4th seed is either going to be Jacksonville or Tennessee. And I guess the question is, like, do the Chargers have Super Bowl aspirations? Or are they just happy to be in the playoffs and are happy to get it over with? I think they probably want to win a game. Mm-hmm. So, if they win out, they have a decent shot at that 5 seed and could play that the winner of that Tennessee Jacksonville game. So that's definitely a more winnable game than going to play at Cincinnati or going to play at Kansas City or whoever the 2 seed is. So I think there is some motivation. I did watch a friend of the podcast, Matt Harmon and Austin Ekeler talking on their podcast. And, Austin was basically saying that as players, they want to play the full 17, but the coaches have to make that decision and, tell them basically you're going to sit down. But we don't really know a whole lot about the Chargers. I don't know that the coverage, beat writer coverage is there compared to some of these other teams in different cities where we're really plugged in and we get a lot of information out of the team by their beat writers. So we don't really know what they're planning to do at this point. I'm just kind of keeping my ear to the ground, hoping we get a clear understanding. But to me, they would want to win. They'd want to go play Jacksonville or Tennessee in that first round of the playoffs and maybe get to the second round.
Do you think that Jalen Hurts is going to play? Because I was reading through your Sneaky Starts article, John, and there seems to be some really good quarterback streaming options this week if you need it, including Gardner Minshew. Do you feel like Hurts is going to play based on the information that you've been reading?
Yeah, he was back at practice yesterday and was taking the first team reps. So very interesting turn of events, because what we've been getting is that, they're not sure he's going to be ready, before the end of the regular season. They're not sure if they're, going to be ready for the playoffs, et cetera. But then he pops up at practice and does really well. So we will see what happens there. Obviously, if Hurts plays, you can't start Gardner Minshew. But you're keeping an eye on it. But I know there's a bunch of injuries around the league. But I think from a streaming standpoint, Jared Goff is a great one at home against Chicago. It's just a fantastic matchup. He's been really good, especially at home. He had a good game last week on the road, but he's been really on fire at home. I think Aaron Rodgers is a decent to good start against a very sketchy Vikings pass defense. Keeping an eye on that, his receivers. We'll talk a little bit about Christian Watson later, but it would obviously help to have him in the lineup. Brock Purdy has been really solid, 2 touchdowns, I think, in 4 straight games. He has a rushing touchdown in there as well. Mike White is back, so he's streamable. And then Teddy Bridgewater, I think, is a pretty good start. He's one I'm sure is available a lot in some of these casual leagues, especially as you get into the playoffs and there's fewer teams trying to stream the quarterback position. But without Tua in there, I think Bridgewater in that offense is pretty solid start as well.
Well, that's going to be my next question. Can we trust the Dolphins' skill position players without Tua? I mean, if you have Tyreek Hill, you're going to start Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle has caught long touchdowns the last 2 weeks. I imagine, John, that you have to play these guys, but maybe some of the running backs with Tua out. What are your thoughts on just the Dolphins overall?
I don't think that Tua's status affects the running backs much. I think they're both a little bit sketchy right now due to the nature of that running game and how they're splitting work. Raheem Mostert was getting fairly trustworthy, but then he had that fumble against the Packers last week. Jeff Wilson got the goal line carry. So we really don't know who's the lead back in that backfield right now. It did look like it was Mostert for a while there, but now it's kind of up in the air. So they're splitting, and it's not a great running game right now as it is. They're both a little bit dicey in terms of starts. They're flex worthy, but low confidence. Tyreek, I don't worry about him at all with Bridgewater in there. He has a high target share on Bridgewater throws this year. Waddle, I think only has 10 targets from Bridgewater, but he's a really good player. So I would just go ahead and stick with him. I think both Hill and Waddle are startable. And just from maybe a DFS or a deep league streaming standpoint, Mike Gesicki has 2 touchdowns from Teddy Bridgewater this year. So, in very limited action. So they do have a little bit of a rapport in the red zone. So just a dart throw type at tight end.
Yeah, I think Tua and Mike McDaniel have forgot that Mike Gesicki is even in that offense. And look, when you got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, I don't blame them. But maybe we will see a Mike Gesicki sighting this weekend. Derek Carr has been benched in Vegas, so we will not get a Derek Carr sighting. In fact, he won't even be with the team over the next two weeks, with the thought being that if he gets hurt and they're trying to either release him or trade him this offseason, that's not good. So Derek Carr benched. It's going to be Jarrett Stidham, former Patriots quarterback. So some familiarity with Josh McDaniels, but the question's obviously, okay, what does this do now to Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller? So offensively, John, how do you view the situation now that Jarrett Stidham's going to be the starter with the Raiders?
Yeah, Stidham's been in the league since 2019. Went to Auburn. Career numbers are, 32 of 61 for 342 yards, 52% completion, 53% completion, 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 6.6 interception rate. And the thing I look at a lot with these players that I don't know a whole lot about, these quarterbacks, is the yards per attempt, and his career yards per attempt is 5.6. So this is below average coming in. We'll see how he does. But, not super encouraging numbers. It's not like you're plugging in Gardner Minshew, who you have a season and a half of starting numbers to go off of, and he's got pretty good numbers to boot. This is a very dicey situation for the Raiders receivers. Davante Adams, decided to, not demand a trade, but ask for a trade and wanted to sign with the Raiders. And now Derek Carr is being benched, and it looks like he's not going to be the quarterback for the Raiders next year. So I'm sure Davante's head's spinning a little bit right now with his decision. But he's certainly lower in the rankings this week compared to where he would normally be. I have him at 14 right now in half PPR, and he's usually in the top 5. The play hasn't been there really the last couple of weeks, but certainly this is throwing it all up in the air. Darren Waller is more of a tight end 2 this week. Even Josh Jacobs is a little bit lower, but it's obviously a really bad matchup against the 49ers. They're first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back. So I think everybody takes a hit in this Raiders offense, given the matchup and given the quarterback change.
Yeah, you do have to wonder what Davante Adams' thought process is now. I mean, wanted in part to go to Las Vegas to play with Derek Carr. They attended, they went to Fresno State together, and now Derek Carr isn't going to be there. And meanwhile, even with Watson going off in Green Bay, they could certainly use Davante Adams. So you have to think. You wonder what Davante Adams is thinking. All right, injury roundup. I'll run through these, John, and then if you want to pick a couple that you wanted to highlight, great. But again, I'll run through it. Speaking of Watson, so Christian Watson did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. John, if you could talk about, Allen Lazard and Romeo Dobbs. Miles Sanders suffered a knee injury last week. He was limited on Thursday. Recording, just a reminder, on Friday morning, so we don't have all of the injury reports for Friday. Tyler Lockett limited on Thursday. Of course, he's missed the last couple of games with an injury, and we thought initially maybe he'd be out for the year, but the Seahawks have kept him off of injured reserve, so maybe he'll play this week. Deebo Samuel practicing again, probably out this week for the Niners. Alvin Kamara did not practice, personal issue, and then also a quad injury. Apparently he's upset with his offensive role. I don't blame him. They haven't really used him. Greg Dulcich, the tight end from the Broncos, did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. And then Rhamondre Stevenson, the running back for the Patriots, was limited in practice on Wednesday.
Yeah, long list of injuries. Just Watson keeping an eye on that. If he's out, then Lazard and Dobbs are going to move up along with Randall Cobb, probably. Miles Sanders looks like he's going to play. He's back. If he were to sit, though, I think you're looking at a Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell committee. Looks like Lockett might play, and they did open the door for that last week after the surgery. They made it sound like he might be back after 1 week off. And if he's back in the lineup, I would feel pretty confident in starting him. It's not a great matchup against the Jets, certainly, but he's been productive all year and was one of the best fantasy value picks of the season. His return would knock DK Metcalf down. I did put him in the rankings, so Metcalf is now at 18 when before he was in the top 10. I'm not expecting Deebo to play. Kamara I would expect to play. We'll see how bad this is right now with him. But he has been getting a lot of touches, but not a lot of third down work, I guess, is what he's upset about. Dulcich, I have him ranked as a tight end 2 right now. He had I think he's better with Russell Wilson in there, but he's got this hamstring injury. It looks iffy. And then Rhamondre, I'm pretty sure he's going to play. He's been limited, I think, for the last month. Damian Harris did miss practice, but I think it was due to a personal reason. So we'll see what he does today.
All right. Sleeper is one of the fastest growing customizable fantasy football platforms in the industry. If you head to sleeper.com or download the latest Sleeper app, you can check it out for yourself. But John and I both use Sleeper in our fantasy leagues, and we really enjoy it. I mean, it's easy to use the app once you become familiar with it. The website is slick as well. And really, it's one of the best fantasy football platforms that I have played on, and John, I know that you're excited as well to continue to use Sleeper. But without further ado, this is the last sleeper sneaky start of the week. And over the last couple of weeks, John, I mean, for regular listeners and viewers, I struggled with the sleeper sneaky start of the week, but I practiced it. I honed my skills. We stuck with it. And now I can actually say the sleeper sneaky start of the week, as opposed to saying sleepy sneaky start of the week.
Yeah, it's incredible. Your metamorphosis this season. It's been great. We haven't had a hiccup in a while.
No.
Even I haven't screwed it up. But for viewers right now, you can see our sleeper sneaky start of the week on screen. He's wearing his big hat. His friend, or I don't know if it's his relative, has a big hat company. Brian Robinson. Looks like Antonio Gibson may miss, and if he does play, I would expect him to be pretty limited. He was a DNP yesterday, so we'll see what happens today. But I believe he practiced on Wednesday and didn't practice on Thursday, so looks like a downgrade, but we'll see. Regardless, Brian Robinson playing against the Browns, 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. Robinson and Jonathan Williams would probably split the work, but not 50-50. Robinson has been seeing occasionally 20-plus carries in that offense. The Browns have yielded an average of 129 total yards, 5.34 yards per carry to opposing backfield since week 13. So it's just a good matchup, big workload. So he'll be ranked higher than usual this week with Gibson kind of hobbled.
And then we move on to our sneaky starts segment. If you want to check out the full list of sneaky starts for John Paulsen, you can find it at 4for4.com. He gives you quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, various options. This is just a little bit of an appetizer for you. Some of the players that we really want to highlight in the podcast. But again, I encourage you to go to 4for4.com, whether you're playing in year-long leagues or your DFS leagues. This article is extremely helpful if you're looking for again, some sneaky plays. So without further ado, let's get into the sneaky starts. Let's start off with a quarterback that is set to make his return this week. It's Mike White, much to the enjoyment of Jets players and fans. He's going to face the Seahawks.
Yeah, it's like the key has risen. Mike White is back, and they're excited. The fan base seems to like him a lot more than Zach Wilson at this point. And this is a kind of a sneaky shootout situation with the Seahawks defense. Seahawks defense has not been very good. They're worse against the run. So I also talked about Zonovan Knight, who's been a little bit quiet the last couple of weeks as a sneaky start in the column. The passing defense is kind of middle of the road, 15th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. But when White plays, the Jets tend to pass more. He's a threat for 40 pass attempts, which is obviously good for all the receivers there. He had his rib injury, and they're still alive for the playoffs. He had 24.8 against the Bears. He had 17.5 against the Vikings a week after. He was not great against the Bills, 10.7 in 91% of the snaps before missing the end of that game. Seattle's been kind of mediocre against the pass, as I mentioned, but Mahomes, Brock Purdy, Derek Carr, Tom Brady have all had at least 16 points against them since week 10. So the matchup is fair, and I think he's a solid streamer this week, given the way that the quarterback position is kind of shaping up.
Curtis Samuel is taking on the Browns. The Browns against wide receivers this year, you can see on the screen. They're generous to wide receivers. So
no, they're actually tough. They're fourth in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So this is kind of going against the matchups that we try to kind of target. But the reason I wanted to talk about Samuel is that we have Carson Wentz back at quarterback now. We haven't talked about yet on the pod today, but he really did target Curtis Samuel at a higher rate, and it's bad. The news is bad for Terry McLaurin, but it's good for Curtis Samuel. He saw a 21.4% target share with Wentz. He only had a 14% target share with Taylor Heineke. Wentz came into the game last week and immediately threw a touchdown to Curtis Samuel. And, with these running back injuries, or at least the one injury with the passing down back, Antonio Gibson, it's possible that, Curtis Samuel sees a little bit of backfield work as well. They have been using him as a runner here and there, but he might, he could certainly serve as the backup running back and at least share that role behind Brian Robinson, Big Cat Brian Robinson. So in his first 4 games with, I think also if you're looking at Jahan Dotson, he's good as well. In his first 4 games with Wentz, 3 for 40 and 2 touchdowns, 4 for 59 and a touchdown, 2 for 10, and 3 for 43 and a touchdown. So there's an extra sneaky start there with Jahan Dotson as well.
My eyes saw the 4th, and my mind said that couldn't be right because we're always highlighting defenses to attack.
Yeah.
So it switched it up. This one I will get right. So the Lions have not been good against tight ends, and as the Bears travel to Detroit, John, Cole Kmet is a sneaky start option. One of your sneaky start options for tight ends.
Yeah, I believe this game has one of the highest, if not the highest, total on the board. And you just look at the Bears' offense and who's going to score touchdowns for them. Justin Fields obviously can do it with his legs. Maybe David Montgomery. But after that, who could make plays in the passing game? Who scores touchdowns in the passing game? And Cole Kmet is the guy that jumps out to me. He had a couple bad matchups in the last couple of weeks. The Bills and Eagles are 1st and 9th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends, so he didn't do very well. The Lions are 30th in that metric. They've given up 3 usable games in the last 4 weeks. CJ Uzomah had 2 for 41 and 2. TJ Hawkinson had 6 for 77. Evan Ingram had 5 for 30 and a touchdown just in the last 4 weeks. And I think Kmet is that the number 1 target right now in that offense. I think he's a nice sneaky start this week at tight end.
All right, and then as we move forward here and kind of wrap up the podcast, the breakout receiver model. I don't know. Do we even mention Mike Evans' name anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I said I would do it until he scored a touchdown, and then I would take full credit for his breakout. I have to stick with it now. It's getting sad. He's blown some
2 more weeks.
Yeah, he's blown some good matchups. Just hasn't happened. It's so weird with Tom Brady at quarterback and the fact that they have a rapport that he does not have a touchdown in quite some time. But yes, I got to mention him. I'm obliged at this point. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is another name that's popping. He's the number 1 receiver in the model this week, and you have Colt McCoy back at quarterback, so that's a good move for DeAndre Hopkins in terms of his upside this week. Garrett Wilson, we talked a little bit about Mike White coming back, but he's thrived with White at quarterback, and he is number 2 receiver popping in the model this week. Expected 14.2. He's only scored 9.2 in the last 3 weeks. And then we briefly touched on Alan Lazard, but I think this week, especially against the Vikings, I think he and Romeo Dobbs, if Watson is out, those 2 are going to be leaned on heavily by Aaron Rodgers. I would lean Lazard over Dobbs at this point because Dobbs is still sort of working his way back from that injury. But, I would expect if Watson is limited or out that Dobbs is going to be ramped up pretty quickly. But both players, I think, can score against this Vikings defense, which I believe is last in the league in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers.
Yeah, they're just hemorrhaging points constantly. I mean, that Minnesota defense, good luck in the postseason. That offense is scary. A lot of people talk about Kirk Cousins and his limitations, but that defense is the bigger problem right now. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of this unfold. But John, it's been another great season at the Most Accurate Podcast. Appreciate all your hard work all season long, and hopefully we'll be the powers that be will allow us to do this again next year.
Yeah, and we'll see if we can schedule another one at some point during the postseason or after the season. Just kind of reflect on the season and talk about things that we learned heading into 2023.
No doubt. And then before you know it, the free agency, the draft, and all that will get going again. But anybody that is playing in a championship game, good luck this weekend. Or if for some reason your league doesn't do it until next week, first of all, get a new commissioner. Second of all, good luck. But everybody have a happy and safe new year. And we do appreciate you, 4for4.com listeners and viewers. This is the first year that we did kind of a streaming video. So hopefully everybody kind of enjoyed that, looking at John and I's ugly mugs. So if you like that, great, fantastic. Maybe you'll get more of that next year. But again, everybody, thank you for your contributions to 4for4.com. If you're a subscriber, and if you're not, no better time than right now when you've got the fantasy playoffs going on and you're trying to wrap up your leagues with some wins. DFS and betting content also at 4for4.com. For John Paulsen, I'm Anthony Stalter signing off for the Most Accurate Podcast in 2022. Good luck, everybody.